They expected a distress call to bring medics, diplomats, maybe a rescue tug. Instead, it awakened the one species the stars chart said should never be contacted at all. Humans. A death world race sealed behind restricted files, described in one chilling line as too dangerous for civilized space. But when the stranded crew finally saw what Earth had sending, the real terrifying part wasn't the battles, the armor, or the size of the warship coming for them. It was the possibility that everything they had been taught about humanity was a lie. The survey vessel Whisper of Dawn drifted in silence through the black emptiness between star systems, its silver hull broken open like thin glass under pressure. Shards of outer plating spun slowly away from the ship, catching distant starlight before vanishing into the dark. From 3 breaches along the port side, pale streams of atmosphere hissed into space and froze into glittering mist. Emergency lights pulsed across the damaged frame in a slow amber rhythm, the only sign that the vessel was not already dead. Inside the command deck, Captain Oren Sale stood with one hand braced against a flickering console, trying to ignore the trembling in his fingers. The Whisper of Dawn had once been one of the most graceful ships in the Selari assembly, built for long-range observation, peaceful contact, and cultural first meetings. Now the deck plating was warped, half the displays were dark, and every breath he took tasted recycled, thin, and metallic. "Life support?" he asked quietly. Navigator Turin didn't answer at once. The younger officer stared at his screen as if the numbers might change if he refused to speak them aloud. At last he swallowed hard and said, "Primary system is gone. Backup filtration is unstable. At current loss rate, breathable air for the adults is 11 hours. For the apprentices," he hesitated. Oren turned. At the rear of the deck, 6 Selari apprentices sat wrapped in silver thermal cloaks, their narrow shoulders rising too quickly with every breath. They had been brought on the mission as observers, the first step in a lifetime of exploration and diplomacy. Their species was known across settled space for patience, restraint, and a near-religious devotion to knowledge. No Selari parent imagined their child's first expedition ending on a crippled ship in deep space. "For the apprentices?" Oren repeated. "Maybe 8, Turin said." The word seemed to sink into the air and stay there. Dr. Lina Vey moved away from the medical station, where 2 injured crew members lay unconscious under emergency blankets. "The atmosphere is thinning faster in the lower compartments," she said. "I've sealed everything I can. I've already used 3 portable oxygen frames on the worst cases. We don't have enough for everyone." Oren closed his eyes for one brief second. 3 days earlier, the Whisper of Dawn had been following a quiet assignment route along an unmapped corridor near the edge of assembly space. The mission was simple: chart mineral signatures, record biosphere readings from 2 unclaimed systems, and return home with data. It was the kind of work Selari excelled at: careful, disciplined, safe. Then they passed through what should have been empty dark. The sensors had shown nothing until the first impact struck. Not a natural asteroid field. Not loose debris. It had been a cloud of dormant metal fragments, old and scattered, likely remnants of some forgotten battle from centuries earlier. Tiny pieces, almost invisible against background radiation. But at transit velocity, each one hit like a missile. The port thrusters were shredded in seconds. The outer hull ruptured. Half the ship depressurized before the internal seals caught up. 11 crew members were thrown off their feet. 2 compartments were lost entirely. Their jump array died before Turin could spool a second escape vector. Since then, they had been surviving minute by minute. "Captain," said First Officer Rel, "we need to initiate distress protocol now." Oren nodded and crossed to the emergency beacon console. The display came to life only after a long stutter, projecting a rotating map of nearby systems into the air above the panel. A soft chime sounded as the ship's damaged computer began scanning for civilizations within rescue range. Searching for viable response candidates, the ship announced in a calm voice that felt almost insulting in the circumstances. Dots of light appeared across the projection. One by one, they faded. Too far. Too primitive. No faster-than-light capability. Hostile relations with the assembly. Insufficient rescue infrastructure. Turin moved closer, reading each line as it passed. The nearest assembly outpost is 36 hours away. Even if they launched immediately, we wouldn't make it. What about private freight lanes? Rel asked. Nothing close enough. The computer chimed again, brighter this time. A new marker flashed into existence near the edge of the map, much closer than the others. The system pulsed once in bright white, then expanded into a full data window. Viable emergency response civilization identified. Designation, Sol 3. Common name, Earth. Dominant species, human. Technological capability, advanced faster-than-light rescue and military transit. Estimated emergency intercept, 13 hours, 42 minutes. For one heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then Turin's face changed. Not relief. Not hope. Fear. Captain, he said, already pulling assembly records onto his display. Earth is in the sealed archives. Oren frowned. Why would a rescue world be sealed? Turin's hands moved rapidly over the controls. The command deck lights flickered again as the database struggled through damaged memory banks. At last a restricted file opened, and the color drained from Turin's features. Oh no. What is it? Dr. Lina asked. Turin looked from the screen to his captain. Deathworld classification. The phrase hit the room like ice water. Even the injured officer nearest the med station opened his eyes. In assembly culture, everyone knew what a death world meant. Worlds with violent weather, crushing predators, unstable geology, poison biomes, brutal competition for food and territory, places so ruthless that any intelligent species evolving there was assumed to be unpredictable at best and monstrous at worst. The assembly did not negotiate with death worlds. It avoided them, quarantined their records, and taught that survival had no place among the stars. Oren stepped beside Turin and read the restricted file for himself. Humanity. Origin planet, high gravity, predator dense, pathogen rich, tectonically unstable, weather extreme. Psychological risk profile, aggressive persistence, rapid militarization, territorial bonding, pack response under existential threat. Assembly contact guidance, do not engage without unanimous oversight. Status, restricted civilization. Dr. Lina read over his shoulder and whispered, but they have rescue capability. Rel gave a harsh, nervous breath. Military rescue capability, apparently. Turin scrolled farther down. There are almost no direct cultural records. Just warning language and sealed incident references. Most of this file is redacted. The youngest of the apprentices, little Senna, spoke from the rear of the deck in a thin voice. Captain, are we going to die? Every grown Cellari on the command deck went still. Oren turned to her, and the look in her dark, frightened eyes made the choice for him. He faced the display again. How long for the next closest non-human civilization, he asked. 29 hours, Turin said. And they're a commercial mining clan with limited medical support. Dr. Lina shook her head immediately. The injured won't last that long. Neither will the children. Rel folded his hands behind his back, a habit he always used when he was afraid. Captain, if the file is accurate, contacting Earth could put the entire crew in danger. And if we do nothing, Lina said, there won't be a crew left to endanger. The beacon console waited in silence. Oren studied the human profile again. Advanced rescue systems. High transit speed. Deathworld origin. Contact forbidden. He thought of everything the assembly taught him as a child. That civilization softened with wisdom. That violent beginnings produced violent futures. That the stars could be neatly sorted between the gentle and the dangerous. Then he looked around his shattered deck at the apprentices fighting for air, the injured curled beneath med blankets, and the officers who still stood at their posts because that was all they had left. Maybe the file is old, Rel said, though he didn't sound like he believed it. Maybe it's wrong, Lina added. Turin gave a strained laugh. And maybe we're about to ask predators for mercy. Oren placed both hands on the console to stop them from shaking. Open transmission, he said. The emergency recorder activated. He spoke slowly, clearly, forcing calm into every word. Distress priority signal to Earth, Sol 3. This is Captain Oren Sale of the Cellari research vessel Whisper of Dawn. Our ship has suffered catastrophic hull damage and life support collapse. We are adrift at these coordinates. He read them aloud. We have 51 souls aboard, including 6 juvenile apprentices. We are a civilian exploration vessel. We carry no offensive weapons. We seek only emergency rescue. Atmospheric failure is progressing. Without assistance, loss of life is expected within 11 hours. If this message reaches you, we are asking for aid. He paused, then added the one thing he hoped any civilized species might understand. We come in peace. The message went out. No one moved for several seconds after the transmission ended. Then Turin exhaled slowly, as if something irreversible had just happened, which, of course, it had. They'll receive it in minutes, he said. And if they answer? Rel asked. Oren looked at the silent human file hovering over the console. Then we find out whether the assembly has been protecting us from monsters, he said, or hiding something else entirely. The waiting began. Minutes stretched. The air grew thinner. The emergency lights kept pulsing. Twice, one of the apprentices started crying quietly, and each time Dr. Lina went to sit beside them and hold their hands. Turin monitored the signal and the diminishing atmosphere. Rel checked seal integrity for problems he already knew he would not find. Then, 43 minutes after the distress call was sent, the communications array crackled sharply to life. A new voice filled the deck. Deep. Human. Controlled. Unknown vessel Whisper of Dawn, this is Rear Admiral Naomi Vance of United Terran Fleet Command. We have received your emergency signal. Rescue assets are launching now. Transmit full structural data, environmental requirements, and medical summaries immediately. Stay online if able. You are not abandoned. Every soul on the deck froze. Not abandoned. Rel was the first to find his voice. They answered. But Oren wasn't staring at the life blinking back to life on the console. He was staring at the sender identification. United Terran Fleet Command. Not a civilian rescue corps. Not a science service. A fleet. A military fleet. And somewhere out in the dark between stars, a deathworld civilization had just decided to come for them. On Earth, the distress signal arrived like a spark dropped into dry fuel. In the central command chamber of United Terran Fleet Command, warning tones rippled across a wall of tactical displays, and every officer within earshot turned toward the source at once. Rear Admiral Naomi Vance was in the middle of a border security briefing when the room shifted from routine tension to total silence. A communications lieutenant at the primary console looked up first. Admiral, we've got an emergency burst from an unidentified vessel. It's not in any human registry. Vance was already moving. At 58, she still carried herself like someone who had spent a lifetime making decisions under pressure. Her uniform was simple, her expression sharper than steel, and when she stepped onto the command floor, conversations died without her asking for it. Play it. The chamber filled with the translated voice of Captain Oren Sale. The message was damaged by static, but the meaning came through clearly enough. Catastrophic hull loss. Life support collapse. 51 souls aboard. 6 juveniles. No weapons. Civilian research vessel. Immediate rescue requested. When the transmission ended, the room remained quiet for one long breath. Then the questions came all at once. Could be fabricated. Could be a lure. That region's too close to the frontier exclusion lanes. Biotelemetry looks real. Vance raised one hand, and the chamber snapped back into order. Source. Her intelligence chief, Commander Elena Shaw, pulled up a star chart and expanded a red-marked stretch of border space. Signal originates from the Karen Drift, just outside our formal patrol envelope. That lane has gotten crowded over the last 8 months. We've logged shipping interference, surveillance drones, and 2 vanished probes. Officially, the neighboring powers deny all involvement. Unofficially, somebody is testing our edges. Vance studied the blinking point representing the crippled alien ship. Closest friendly unit. Captain Miles Chen, Fleet Coordination, answered immediately. No civilian rescue ships within range. Nearest naval asset with full medical capacity is the TNS Leviathan. She just finished overwatch near the New Carthage corridor. If she departs now at max fold, estimated intercept is a little under 14 hours. A low murmur moved through the room. The Leviathan was not subtle. It was one of Earth's largest active warships, a dreadnought carrier hybrid built for scenarios where diplomacy had already failed. Sending it to answer a distress call was like responding to a house fire with a storm of armored steel. Shaw glanced toward the Admiral. If this is bait, that's exactly the kind of ship they'd want us to commit. Vance didn't answer right away. Instead, she replayed the final lines of the transmission on her wrist display. We have 6 juvenile apprentices aboard. We seek only emergency rescue. There were things military officers learned never to trust. Distress calls on the edge of hostile space ranked high on that list. There were also things they learned never to ignore. Run another pass on the life signatures, Vance said. A science analyst leaned over her terminal. Already did, ma'am. Respiratory distress markers are consistent. Elevated carbon load, dropping oxygen saturation, stress hormone spike across the entire population. The young readings are especially bad. Could someone fake it? Yes, Shaw said. But not cheaply, and not sloppily. Whoever built this profile had detailed internal biology and real-time suffering curves. If it's deception, it's world-class. Vance looked around the chamber. Any signs of concealed weapons on the vessel? Minimal power output, Chen said. No offensive signatures we can confirm. Their drive is dead. Hull damage matches high-velocity debris strike or microfragment storm. A young operations officer spoke carefully. Admiral, if they really are civilians, and we delay, they die. That settled it. Vance straightened. Open a secure channel to the Leviathan. The main display shifted, and a few seconds later the bridge of the warship appeared. It was a wider, darker room than Fleet Command, lit by tactical blue and status green. Officers moved with practiced efficiency behind the command chair. At the center stood Captain Elias Ward, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, steady-eyed in the way only very dangerous calm people are. Rear Admiral, Ward said. We received the alien distress package. My medical staff is already reviewing the attached bioscans. Your assessment. Ward glanced to someone off-screen, then back to the camera. Unknown species, definitely not human, but the emergency reads genuine. Their atmospheric dependence is extreme. If the telemetry is accurate, they are hours from mass casualty. My chief medical officer says we can adapt environmental systems and build emergency transfer rigs around their biology. It'll be ugly, but it'll work. Vance nodded once. You are ordered to proceed immediately to the coordinates and conduct full rescue operations. No surprise showed on Ward's face. He had probably expected the order before the call connected. Understood. Shaw stepped closer to the Admiral's side. Captain, intelligence assessment remains uncertain. That sector is unstable. There is a non-zero chance this signal is being used to pull a Terran ship into monitored space. Ward's jaw tightened slightly. Rules of engagement. Protect your vessel and crew, Vance said. But listen carefully, Captain. If those readings are real, there are children dying out there. You go prepared for a fight, and you go intending to save every life on that ship. Yes, ma'am. Bring medical modules online before transit. Translator division gets priority processing on the language package. I want atmosphere adaptation, trauma prep, quarantine buffers, and recovery berths ready before you come out of fold. Ward allowed himself the faintest smile. Already in motion. That's why I called you. The channel ended. The room in Fleet Command was still for a second, then exploded into work. Orders flew in every direction. Tactical began plotting the Leviathan's approach. Intelligence widened surveillance on the surrounding systems. Medical liaison teams reviewed the alien bioscans, looking for cross-contamination concerns, pressure tolerances, and compatible compounds. Diplomatic advisors were called in from 3 time zones away and told, without explanation, to get dressed and come fast. Shaw lowered her voice. Do we notify the Assembly Contact Office? Vance gave her a flat look. The same assembly that has left every request for formal dialogue unanswered for 22 years. That is the one. The same assembly whose member traffic keeps edging closer to our colonies while insisting we're too dangerous to acknowledge. Shaw said nothing. Vance turned back to the star map. No. Not yet. Until I know who these people are and whether they're actually in trouble, this stays in Terran hands. A lieutenant near the rear station hesitated, then spoke. Ma'am, if this is real, this'll be first contact. Vance's eyes stayed on the blinking dot. No, she said quietly. First contact happened the moment someone out there decided Earth was worth calling when everything else failed. Aboard the Leviathan, the order hit like controlled thunder. The giant warship woke in layers. Deep within its armored spine, reactors climbed to full emergency load. Along the hangar decks, rescue shuttles were fueled and fitted with medical harnesses instead of assault packs. In the environmental engineering sections, technicians ripped open sealed adaptation kits and began recalibrating atmospheric processors for a species they had never met. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Lena Cross stood over a holodisplay of Cellari anatomy as her team crowded around. Pay attention, she said. Their gas exchange happens through dual respiratory channels. Think lungs plus external filtration structures. That means oxygen delivery isn't enough. Humidity balance matters. Pressure swings matter. Trace compounds matter. If we overcorrect like they're human, we could kill them faster than vacuum would. One of her nurses frowned. And we've never treated anything like this before. Cross nodded. That means we do what medicine always does us. We observe, we adapt, fast, and we do not panic. Elsewhere, in environmental control, Chief Engineer Hassan Reed was rebuilding an unused troop deck into temporary alien quarters. Raise moisture content by 12%. Soften lighting. Translation panels in every compartment. I don't care if it's ugly. I care if they can breathe. In the Marine staging bay, Major Sofia Alvarez addressed 2 full rescue squads standing in powered boarding armor. Listen up, she said. Unknown biology, unknown psychology, unknown cultural triggers. So keep it simple. Weapons tight unless I say otherwise. You move slow, hands visible, voices calm. If they panic, we de-escalate. If they lash out, we contain without lethal force unless there is absolutely no alternative. Understood? A wall of armored voices answered, yes, ma'am. Good. Today we're not the thing they fear. We're the reason they survive. Near the bridge, two translation specialists sat shoulder to shoulder, replaying fragments of Selari's speech and building an emergency phrase set. Need help. Safe. Air. Doctor. Child. We are here. One of them taped the words to his wrist tablet like a student before an exam. Captain Ward walked through it all without interrupting, taking in every station, every adjustment, every faces. Fear was there. So was curiosity. But stronger than both was something older and harder to kill in human crews. Resolve. By the time the Leviathan reached the outer fold line, the ship had transformed from a war machine on patrol into something stranger and far more dangerous. A fortress preparing to save strangers. On the bridge, Ward took his seat as the final readiness lights turned green across the tactical board. Rescue shuttles locked. Medical deck standing by. Environmental adaptation at 93% and climbing. Fold corridor plotted. Ward looked once at the tiny beacon pulsing in the dark. Take us in. Space bent. The Leviathan vanished into fold transit like a blade disappearing beneath black water, racing toward a crippled alien vessel that had no idea what kind of answer its plea had summoned. And back on Earth, Rear Admiral Naomi Vance stood in the command chamber watching the war's bright line spear across the star map, knowing that within hours humanity would either meet a new species in their most desperate hour, or walk straight into the opening move of something much larger. By the time the Leviathan was 4 hours away, the whisper of dawn had begun to feel less like a ship and more like a slow, floating countdown. The air had turned sharp and dry in the lungs. Every surface inside the vessel carried a thin layer of cold condensation from failing thermal control. The lights no longer stayed steady. They dimmed, flared, and dimmed again, as if the ship itself were fighting to remain awake long enough to see help arrive. Captain Oren Sale stood near the forward viewport and watched a distant field of stars blur behind his own reflection. He had not slept since the hull strike. None of his senior officers had. Sleep required the. Sleep meant surrender, and no one aboard was ready to do that while the numbers on the life support panel kept falling. 12% atmospheric reserve, Turin said from the navigation station, his voice raw from breathing damaged air. CO2 is climbing faster now. Lower deck readings are no longer livable without masks. Dr. Lina crossed the deck with one of the last portable breath frames in her hands. She had given the better units to the apprentices hours ago, and now she was improvising repairs with sealant patches and split tubing. Nero stopped responding again, she said quietly. I brought him back, but if we don't get clean oxygen soon, I'll start losing adults too. At the rear of the deck, little Senna leaned against her older brother with half-open eyes. The other apprentices weren't speaking anymore. They were too tired. Their instructor, who had spent the early part of the mission teaching them how to document first contact etiquette, now sat on the floor and stroked their shoulders in helpless silence. Rel turned from the systems board. Any update from the human ship? Turin checked the long-range scan. One encrypted return ping 15 minutes ago. They're still inbound. Fast. How fast? Oren asked. Turin swallowed. Too fast for anything in our public records. No one liked the sound of that. For hours they had held on to the same thought like a rope thrown from somewhere beyond sight. Humans are coming. Rescue is coming. Stay alive until the impossible arrives. But the closer that moment got, the more the hidden fear came with it. The assembly archives did not mark civilizations as forbidden without reason. Somewhere in Oren's mind, every old warning he had ever heard about deathworld species had begun to wake up. Savage biology. Predatory instinct. Militarized culture. Conflict as first language. And yet those same beings had answered in less than an hour. The contradiction gnawed at him. Then every console on the deck flashed crimson. Contact. Turin shouted, louder than anyone had heard him since the accident. Fold rupture forming off our starboard bow. The injured officer nearest the med station tried to sit up. The apprentices looked toward the forward glass. Oren staggered to the tactical display just as space itself seemed to split open. A seam of violent white light tore across the darkness. It widened into a spinning corridor of energy, brighter than any jump gate the Cellari had ever built. Radiation alarms screamed, then corrected themselves as the sensors recalibrated around a power signature too massive for the damaged systems to process cleanly. Something was coming through the rupture, something so large that the Whisper of Dawn's computers first labeled it as an object cluster instead of a single vessel. Then the Leviathan emerged. For one frozen second, no one aboard the Cellari ship breathed at all. It was colossal. The human warship poured out of fold space like a moving continent of metal and shadow, easily dozens of times larger than the Whisper of Dawn. Its hull was matte black, broken by lines of white running lights and amber docking beacons. Armor bands wrapped around its frame in layered slabs thick enough to look geological. Long weapon housings lined its flanks. Broad hangar mouths sat recessed beneath armored shields. Turret clusters moved with slow, deliberate precision as they reacquired space around them, and engine sections at the stern glowed with a contained blue fire that made the Whisper's surviving power core look like a toy. It did not look like something built merely to endure battle. It looked like something built to decide it. And win. One of the apprentices whimpered. Dr. Lina stared at the viewport in open disbelief. That's a rescue vessel. Rel answered without humor. If it is, I'd hate to see what they call a battleship. Oren felt his stomach tighten as fresh scan data poured in. Mass readings climbed past what the systems could easily display. Shield outputs dwarfed anything in the assembly merchant fleets. Weapon signatures kept resolving one after another until Turin finally muted the tactical list because no one needed to hear more. A transmission signal cut through the bridge. Turin looked at Oren. It's them. Open channel. A crisp human voice filled the air, translated a half-second later by the Whisper's failing language system. Cellari vessel Whisper of Dawn, this is Terran warship Leviathan under the command of Captain Elias Ward. We have arrived on your position and are beginning emergency rescue operations. Your current drift, hull condition, and life support failure have been confirmed. Stand by for docking instructions. Even now, the human voice was calm. Professional. Controlled. And attached to a warship so overwhelming that every Cellari instinct screamed at the same conclusion, danger. Oren stepped closer to the comm panel. Captain Ward, he said, fighting to keep his own voice level, your vessel is heavily armed. We are a civilian survey ship. We have no defense capability. We request mercy for our non-combatants. Silence. Turin turned slowly toward him. Rel shut his eyes. Then the same human voice returned, no longer merely calm now, but openly confused. Captain Sale, mercy is not required. We're not here to harm you. We're here because you asked for help. Another voice entered the channel, this one female, lower and warmer. This is Dr. Lena Cross, Chief Medical Officer of the Leviathan. We've adapted emergency rigs to your biological. Your injured and juvenile personnel need transfer immediately. With your permission, our boarding teams will begin treatment the moment our shuttles lock on. Lina stared at the speaker as if she might have misheard the translation. They prepared medicine for us. Turin whispered, before they even arrived. Captain Ward spoke again. For safety, our rescue teams will be armored. Do not interpret that as hostility. We are operating in unknown conditions and hostile border protocol remains standard. Our personnel will keep weapons secured unless threatened. Can you authorize boarding? Every eye on the deck turned to Oren. Behind him, one of the apprentices collapsed sideways into the arms of the instructor. That decided it. You have authorization, Oren said. Please, hurry. Outside the viewport, the Leviathan rotated with impossible precision. Along its ventral side, 3 smaller craft detached and began crossing the distance between the ships. Even those small craft were larger than the Whisper's auxiliary landers. They were angular, armored, and fast, painted with Terran markings and bright medical symbols that seemed almost surreal against such aggressive shapes. They put rescue insignia on gunships, Rel murmured. Maybe to them there's no difference, Lina said. The first shuttle slid into position alongside the Whisper of Dawn's central docking collar. Magnetic clamps fired with a deep metallic thud that vibrated through the frame of the ship. Pressure equalization lights blinked on. Somewhere in the corridor beyond the deck, the outer hatch began cycling. The Cellari crew gathered instinctively, fear overcoming exhaustion for a final surge of adrenaline. The adults who could still stand moved protectively toward the apprentices. Lina picked up a med scanner she could barely hold. Rel, though he knew resistance would be pointless, placed himself between the hatch corridor and the children. Heavy footsteps approached. Not hurried footsteps. Measured ones. Deliberate ones. The bridge door slid open. The first human through the threshold looked as terrifying as the Leviathan itself. Tall. Broad. Encased in dark environmental armor thick enough to turn aside shrapnel or small arms fire. A sealed helmet covered the face completely, its visor alive with pale display light. A compact weapon was clipped at the chest, though pointed safely down. Tubes, hard seals, reinforced joints, magnetic boots, the entire figure looked less like a medic and more like a machine built for assault boarding. 3 more armored humans entered behind the first, carrying hard medical cases and atmospheric canisters. The lead figure stopped. Then, in one slow motion meant for reassurance, the human reached up and removed the helmet. A human woman looked back at them. Her hair was dark and cut close at the sides. Her face was tired, stern at first glance, marked by an old scar across one eyebrow. But her eyes held no cruelty. Only focus. And concern. She lowered the helmet under one arm and spoke in careful, accented Cellari. "I'm Major Sofia Alvarez," she said. "We're here to take you home alive." The first thing that shattered Captain Oren's expectations wasn't the human armor, or the weapon locked to Major Alvarez's chest, or even the fact that she had stepped out of a shuttle that looked built for war. It was her voice. Calm. Grounded. Focused completely on the dying crew in front of her, as if the size of the Leviathan and the fear it inspired meant nothing at all compared to the simple truth that 51 strangers were running out of air. She took one slow step forward and lowered herself just enough to seem less imposing. Even then, she was nearly a head taller than any Cellari on the deck. "No sudden movements," she said gently in careful Cellari. "We need to stabilize the children first." Behind her, the other humans spread out with startling efficiency. Their armored boots hit the deck with heavy metallic sounds, but their hands moved with exact restraint. No one reached for a weapon. No one barked commands. 2 of them dropped compact canisters onto the floor and activated them. A soft hiss filled the bridge as portable atmosphere processors began feeding a new gas blend into the failing air. Within seconds, the difference was noticeable. Cooler. Cleaner. Moisture-rich. Dr. Lina sucked in a breath and stared. "They adjusted it," she whispered. One of the humans, a medic with a white insignia painted across his shoulder plate, knelt beside the nearest unconscious crew member and ran a scanner over the Cellari's neck and chest. Colored symbols flashed across the device in patterns Oren didn't understand. The medic tapped twice on his wrist pad, then removed a flexible breathing mask from his kit and fitted it over the patient's respiratory frills with surprising care. The unconscious Cellari coughed once, then his breathing eased. Lina moved instinctively toward him. "What mixture are you using?" The medic looked up. He was younger than Oren expected, with close-cropped blonde hair and a face that still carried the last softness of youth beneath the stress of training. His translator unit clipped to his collar rendered his words into clipped but understandable scifi. 41% oxygen, higher humidity, adjusted trace saline aerosol, he said. Your people were drying out as much as they were suffocating. Lina blinked in disbelief. You diagnosed that from the distress package? The human gave a quick nod and returned to work. From that, plus whatever your biology was willing to tell us once we got close enough to scan. Everywhere Oren looked, the same contradiction repeated itself. A species archived as dangerous had crossed 13 hours of hard-fold space, arrived in a warship large enough to conquer nations, and in the first seconds after boarding had done nothing except make the air easier to breathe. One of the younger apprentices shrank back when a second armored human approached. The child's eyes widened, and a weak, frightened noise escaped her throat. Instantly the human stopped, unclipped his helmet, and set it on the deck so she could see his face. He was dark-skinned, broad-featured, with tired eyes and an expression so openly concerned that the child's panic faltered. It's okay, he said softly, though the translator lagged behind him. I know we look scary. We're here to help. He extended an empty hand, palm up, and waited. After a moment, the child let him place the breathing frame over her face. Major Alvarez turned toward Oren. Captain, I need a count of those unable to walk. 17, Lina answered before he could. 6 critical. 3 with internal injuries. The rest are oxygen collapse and impact trauma. Alvarez touched 2 fingers to the side of her helmetless ear, speaking into a comm implant. Bridge team to Shuttle Bay. We need priority medical transfer for 17 non-ambulatory, 6 pediatric high-risk, and atmospheric support in all docking corridors. A man's voice answered immediately over the channel. Captain Ward. Approved. Medical deck is ready. Bring them straight through. Oren watched the exchange with growing confusion. There was no hesitation. No argument about cost, risk, or diplomacy. The humans had not arrived to inspect, negotiate, or control. They had arrived already committed. Rel, still standing protectively near the children, glanced at the compact firearm on one Marine's armor. If this is a rescue mission, he said hoarsely, why bring weapons at all? Major Alvarez didn't seem offended by the question. If anything, she answered as though she had expected it. Because we came fast, she said. And fast means ready for the worst to answer first. Out here, we prepare for the worst so we can still do the right when it matters. That answer should have chilled Oren. Instead, it lodged somewhere deeper. The scifi assembly taught that militarization corrupted compassion. Yet these humans did not seem to view force and mercy as opposites. To them, one protected the other. Dr. Cross joined the operation by hololink projected from a medic's wrist unit. Her image appeared above the deck as a small blue figure in medical scrubs, hair tied back, eyes sharp with concentration. Dr. Lina? She asked. Lina stared, then straightened. Yes. I'm Dr. Lina Cross. I need your help identifying which of your people are most vulnerable to pressure fluctuation during transport. Lina recovered quickly and moved to the nearest patient. This one fractured his thoracic ridge when we lost gravity balance. That one has blood pooling near the lower respiration cavity. The smallest apprentices are failing fastest. Cross listened without interrupting, already marking transport order on a floating schematic. Understood. We're taking the children first, then severe trauma, then the oxygen collapse cases. Can any of your conscious adults assist with calming the juveniles? I can, said the instructor weakly from the rear. Before Lina could argue, a human medic was already at her side with a portable support harness. He didn't carry her. He let her rise with dignity, then steadied her only when her legs almost failed. On another part of the deck, Turin tried to stand and nearly collapsed. A broad-shouldered Marine caught him before he hit the floor. The human's gauntlet hands looked capable of crushing metal, but he lowered the navigator like something fragile and irreplaceable. "Easy," the Marine said. "I've got you." Turin stared up at him in stunned silence. Soon the bridge became a pattern of motion. Stretchers unfolded. Atmosphere packs were fitted. Medical tags were placed on wrists and collars. Human voices moved around the chamber in quick, efficient bursts, but never rose into panic. Their discipline was unmistakably military, yet the purpose of that discipline was unmistakably preservation. Oren found himself standing uselessly in the middle of it all, watching his crew be saved by people his civilization had taught him to fear. Major Alvarez approached him again. "Captain, you're next." He shook his head. "I leave last." "Normally, sure," she said. "Today, no. This is my ship." Alvarez glanced once at the dead displays, the buckled paneling, the emergency light struggling to stay alive. "No," she said quietly. "This is a coffin pretending to be a ship. Your crew needs their captain alive." The bluntness startled him, but there was no cruelty in it. Only certainty. He looked around the bridge one last time. The whisper of dawn had been his command, his home between suns, his promise that exploration could remain noble and clean. Now its walls echoed with foreign footsteps and emergency alarms, and somehow that felt less like violation than salvation. At last he nodded. Two medics guided him toward the docking corridor. As they moved through the ship, he passed more human teams spreading into the adjacent compartments, checking for trapped personnel, sealing unstable sections, and marking salvageable systems. Not one paused to pocket equipment, inspect data cores, or claim trophies. Their focus remained fixed on the living. The shuttle interior was just as contradictory as everything else about the humans. Reinforced plating lined the walls. Shock seats ran along both sides. Emergency weapons lockers sat sealed under red strips. And in the center of all that military hardware, half the compartment had been reconfigured into a miniature intensive care ward. The children were strapped into floating support cradles near the front, each one connected to custom breathing systems. Dr. Cross herself was waiting inside, bareheaded, gloved, and already treating a badly injured Cellari officer with tools Oren had never seen before. She looked up as he entered. "Captain Sale. Sit. Save your strength. Questions later." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but lacked the strength. As the last stretcher locked into place, Major Alvarez touched the wall. "Bay secure. Ready for separation." The shuttle disengaged with a shudder and pulled away from the dying Cellari vessel. Through a side port, or watched the whisper of dawn drift alone against the stars, small and wounded beside the impossible bulk of the Leviathan. For the first time since the accident, he felt something dangerously close to relief. Then the shuttle crossed into the warship's vast hangar, and his relief turned into awe. The bay inside the Leviathan was larger than some assembly stations. Floodlights lit rows of service crews, medical carts, atmospheric processors, and open transport lanes already cleared for the incoming aliens. Human personnel stood aside as the shuttle touched down, not crowding, not gawking, simply ready. Some wore uniforms, some engineering coveralls, some white medical coats. All of them watched the Cellari with the same expression. Concern. As the hatch opened and fresh, carefully balanced air flowed in, and the others were carried into the heart of the human ship, he realized that the most dangerous thing about this first contact may not have been humanity at all. It may have been the lies someone had worked very hard to keep him. The medical deck of the Leviathan should have felt cold, mechanical, and foreign. Instead, to Captain Oren's exhausted surprise, it felt almost impossibly prepared for them. The moment his stretcher crossed the threshold, he saw that the lighting had been softened to a dim ocean blue glow more comfortable for Cellari eyes. The air was warmer than the shuttle, rich with moisture and a faint mineral balance that mimicked the atmosphere of his home reefs. Along the walls, translation panels flashed in both Terran symbols and hurriedly rendered Cellari script. Direction markers read recovery, treatment, rest, and children's ward. Humans had done all this in less than 14 hours. The thought alone was almost harder to process than the rescue itself. Rows of medical beds lined the chamber, but several had already been rebuilt for Cellari anatomy with curved support frames, pressure cradles, and breathing arches fitted over each patient. Teams of Terran doctors and medics moved from bed to bed with astonishing speed, yet there was no chaos in the room. No shouting. No confusion. They operated with the discipline of seasoned soldiers and the tenderness of caregivers who had decided, long before the shuttle landed, that every life on those stretchers mattered. "Bring the pediatric cases here," Dr. Lena Cross called, pointing toward a partitioned corner where smaller support units were waiting. "No stimulant boosts on the youngest until I clear it. Keep the hydration mix low sodium. Their tissues are already stressed." A Terran nurse glanced toward one of the Cellari apprentices, whose breathing had become shallow again during transfer. "Doctor, saturation dropping." Cross was beside the child in seconds. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask whether the alien biology was too unfamiliar to risk intervention. Her scanner flashed over the apprentice's neck frills, chest cavity, and pulse lines. She adjusted a valve, altered the mist feed, then placed one gloved hand lightly on the child's shoulder. "Stay with me," she said softly. "You made it this far. Don't stop now." The apprentice convulsed once, then settled as the monitor tone evened out. Oren, half upright on his own recovery cradle, stared in disbelief. Dr. Lina was on the next treatment line over, still weak, still bruised, but already working beside the human staff. For the first time since the accident, there was color back in her face. She was explaining Cellarian circulatory timing to a pair of Terran physicians while they followed every word with intense concentration. "This membrane here," Lina said, gesturing to a hollow model of Cellari anatomy, "it responds badly to rapid thermal change." One of the Terran doctors, a woman with silver glasses and sleeves rolled to her elbows, nodded immediately and updated the treatment protocol. "Then no cold saline flushes. Warm infusion only." "Got it." Oren had never seen non-Cellari medicine adapt so quickly. Even among assembly species, cross-biological care required committees, approvals, and slow consultation. The humans were making corrections in real time, learning while saving lives, somehow doing both with confidence. Across the chamber, Turin was being fitted with a respiratory collar by a large Terran medic whose forearms looked thick enough to bend access beams. The contrast was almost absurd. The human looked like he belonged at the front of an assault line, not in a hospital ward. Yet his voice was so gentle that Oren had to strain to hear it. "You're okay," the medic was saying. "Slow breaths. Don't fight the machine. Let it do the work." Turin, who had spent the first hour after boarding convinced the humans might enslave them, looked back at the man with open confusion. "Why are you being kind to us?" The medic paused, honestly caught off guard. "Because you needed help." As if no more explanation was required. Nearby, First Officer Rel was undergoing bone repair on his left arm. He had remained rigid and suspicious during the first few minutes aboard, but suspicion became harder to maintain when the human technician aligning the regeneration brace kept apologizing every time the process caused him pain. "Sorry," the technician muttered. "Almost there. I know this sucks." Rel winced, then stared. "You apologize while hurting me?" The human frowned. "Well, yeah." Later, Oren would replay that small exchange again and again, because in some quiet way it shook him as deeply as anything else he had seen. The assembly archives had described humanity as efficient predators from a violent cradle. What he saw instead was a species whose strength and frightening precisely because it had learned how to wrap itself around mercy. Several hours passed in fragments of treatment and fading exhaustion. The Cellari who had arrived unconscious began waking one by one beneath the blue lights of the medical deck. None woke to interrogation. None woke to restraints. They woke to stabilized air, balanced fluids, and human staff ready with translation units and patient reassurances. The children recovered fastest. By the second cycle aboard, the 6 Cellari apprentices had been transferred from critical support to a dedicated recovery suite attached to the main ward. Oren visited as soon as Dr. Cross allowed him to stand. He expected to find them frightened and silent. Instead, he found little Senna sitting upright in a padded cradle while a young Terran crewman showed her how to fold a strip of sterile wrapping paper into the shape of a bird. Not a weapon. Not a machine. A bird. The crewman looked up in alarm when he saw the captain. "Sir, I'm off shift, I was just keeping her company." Senna interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "He made it flap." The human smiled and tugged the paper wings. Senna gave out a small, astonished laugh. Around her, the other apprentices watched with cautious fascination as 2 more Terrans set down containers of water gel sweet specially reformulated for Cellari chemistry after Dr. Cross confirmed the ingredients were safe. Captain Oren stood in the doorway and felt something inside him give way. This was not performance. Not manipulation. No civilization would mobilize this much precision compassion merely to deceive a broken research crew. And if they would, then the assembly's file on Earth was still incomplete in the most terrifying way imaginable. Commander Alvarez entered the ward a few moments later, out of armor now and wearing a simpler dark uniform. Without the plating, she looked more human and somehow more formidable. Her scar was clearer. So was the fatigue in her face. "You should be resting, Captain," she said. "I might say the same to you." She glanced toward the children. "I've had rest. They're alive. Good trade." Oren followed her look. "Your people keep behaving in ways I was taught were impossible for your kind." That drew the faintest edge of humor from her. "Let me guess. We're supposed to eat our young and declare war on furniture." He almost smiled despite himself. The records were less specific. But not much more flattering. Alvarez leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely. "Yeah. We've gotten that before." "From whom?" For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked down the corridor toward the armored hatch beyond the med deck, where Terran Marines still stood watch even in a hospital zone. "From civilizations that hear what kind of world made us," she said. "Not from the kind of people who've actually needed us." The words stayed with him long after she left. By the end of the first full day aboard the Leviathan, the Cellari delegation had been moved from emergency treatment into prepared living quarters on a converted habitat deck. The space had once clearly housed troops or expedition personnel, but it had been transformed with startling care. Moisture regulators kept the atmosphere comfortable. Water basins had been installed for Cellari rest cycles. Privacy screens divided family units. Translation consoles sat at every entrance. One section had even been turned into a quiet learning room for the apprentices so they wouldn't panic in an unfamiliar war environment. When Turin saw it, he simply turned slowly in place and whispered, "They rebuilt part of a warship for us." Rel answered from behind him, flexing his healing arm. "In a day." Dr. Lina stood near one of the wall displays reading the environmental controls. "No," she said softly. "Before we even arrived." And that was true. Every corridor, every medical setting, every translated sign pointed to the same unavoidable conclusion. The humans had believed them before they met them. That night, if the cycle aboard a Terran ship could still be called night, Captain Oren stood alone near an observation blister looking out across the stars. Behind him, somewhere deeper in the Leviathan, her crew slept beside human engineers and human medics and human sailors who had never once treated them like enemies. Ahead of him stretched the black, endless, and silent. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask the question that truly frightened him. If the assembly had lied about humans, what else had it lied about? 3 days after the rescue, Captain Oren Sale was strong enough to walk the Leviathan's corridors on his own, and that was exactly when the contradictions became harder to ignore, not easier. Up close, the Terran warship was every inch as dangerous as it had looked from the outside. Bulkhead doors could seal like fortress gates in a heartbeat. Armed Marines stood watch at key junctions with the stillness of predators at rest. Every few decks, warning placards marked rapid response stations, emergency weapon lockers, and combat evacuation routes. This was not a vessel that merely survived danger. It anticipated it, mapped it, trained for it. And yet in the same corridor, a young Terran technician stopped to let one of the Cellari apprentices pass first, smiling awkwardly as she practiced a greeting in broken Cellrali. In the habitat section, a pair of off-duty engineers had rigged a wall projector to display calm reef patterns because they had learned the children slept better with moving color. In the mess annex, human cooks had spent an entire shift trying to recreate Cellari mineral broth from Dr. Cross's notes, celebrating like they had won a campaign when Dr. Lina finally admitted it was not entirely terrible. Everything about the humans told Oren they were built for conflict. Everything about the humans told him they had chosen not to become cruel. That tension sat with him as he followed a junior officer toward Captain Elias Ward's ready room. The invitation had come without ceremony, just a polite message saying the captain wished to speak whenever Oren felt well enough. But Oren had already guessed what the conversation would be about. He had spent 3 days aboard the Leviathan learning more about humanity than his assembly files had ever bothered to include. Now there was only one question left. Why? The ready room door slid open with a soft tone. Ward was standing near a broad display table, one hand resting against its edge as a tactical map rotated above the surface. Without the bridge behind him, he looked less like the commander of a warship and more like an old frontier officer who had long ago learned not to waste movement or energy on intimidation. The room was spare, almost severe. A desk. 2 chairs. Several framed unit insignia. One wall of star charts. No luxury. No ornament beyond what had clearly been earned it. Captain Sale, Ward said. Please. Sit. Oren lowered himself into the chair opposite him. I owe your people a debt that cannot be repaid. Ward took the other seat. You don't owe us for being rescued. In my experience, Oren said carefully, such debts are not usually answered by war fleets. That earned the faintest curve at one corner of Ward's mouth. Then maybe your experience is missing some data. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ward tapped the table, and the image above it changed. A familiar region of frontier space bloomed into view, threaded with shipping lanes, patrol corridors, and clusters of marked installations. This, Ward said, is the border volume where we found you. Oren nodded slowly. Near the Karen Drift. Right. Now look closer. The map zoomed in. 3 separate webs of outposts appeared along the perimeter, orbital stations, fortified anchorages, sensor nets, transit relays, and defense rings, none of which had been on the public charts Oren carried aboard the Whisper of Dawn. His throat tightened. Those aren't pirate structures. No, Ward said. They're not. Colored overlays lit one after another. Keth Dominion, Ward said, indicating the first line of stations. Illyri Trade Compact, despite the name. And the Radine Collective. Oren stared at the display. All 3 were recognized member powers of the Assembly. All 3 traded openly with Cellari Space. All 3 filed annual declarations celebrating interstellar stability and cooperative growth. They're building this here, he asked quietly. They already built it, Ward said. Over the last 6 years. Piece by piece. Always one station more than they admitted. Always one patrol farther than the last agreement. Whenever we objected, we were told the same thing. Scientific monitoring. Anti-piracy. Navigational protection. Temporary positions. Oren looked from one highlighted network to the next. None of them looked temporary. They looked like the opening moves of a border squeeze. Ward watched him closely. How much of this did the assembly brief you on before your mission? None. That doesn't surprise me. Oren lifted his eyes. You say that as though the omission was deliberate. Ward was silent for a moment. Then he reached to another control and pulled up a narrow column of archived messages. Diplomatic requests. Petition notices. Requests for monitored dialogue. Emergency contact protocols. Cultural exchange proposals. Scientific liaison appeals. Every one of them bore the same final status. No response. Deferred. Restricted. Denied without engagement. Earth has been trying to establish formal contact with the Assembly for 23 years, Ward said. Not membership. Not even alliance status. Just contact. Every request disappears into a wall of silence. Meanwhile, Assembly states push infrastructure closer to our colonies and tell their own citizens we're too dangerous to be spoken to. Oren felt heat rise beneath his skin. I saw the restricted file. Humanity is designated a death world species. It claims your people are violence-driven, unstable, expansionist by instinct. Ward didn't flinch. And after 3 days on my ship, what's your assessment? Oren thought of Senna laughing over a paper bird. Of the Marine who had apologized while setting Rel's bone. Of Dr. Cross rebuilding medicine for an alien species she had never met. Of Major Alvarez saying they prepared for the worst so they could protect what mattered. My assessment, he said slowly, is that the file was written by someone who feared you before they understood you. For the first time, something sharper moved behind Ward's eyes. Not anger exactly. Something older. Wearier. That's one possibility. What's the other? Ward leaned back. That they understood us just fine. And fear was the point. Before Oren could answer, the ready room door chimed. Enter. Commander Shaw appeared on the threshold, carrying a data slate. Her expression alone made the room colder. Captain, pardon the interruption. We just received updated reconnaissance from the frontier screen. Ward stood. Show me. She placed the slate on the table, and a fresh tactical layer spread across the stars. A concentration of contacts glowed red near one of the outer human settlements, a colony world marked Haven's Reach. Oren's breath caught. That's a fleet. Keth Dominion Strike Group, Shaw said. Or the beginning of one. 38 capital hulls confirmed, plus escorts and logistics tenders still forming behind them. Trajectory puts them on a line toward Haven's Reach in under 7 days. Ward's voice went quiet in a way that was somehow more alarming than shouting. Any declaration? Officially, a customs exercise. Of course. Oren stared at the projection. Haven's Reach was not a major fortress world. He could tell that even from the simplified human chart. It was a colony system, farms, industry, civilians. Do they expect you not to notice? He asked. Shaw answered before Ward could. We think they expect us to notice. We also think they expect us to shoot first. The implication hit him instantly. A clash on the border. Civilian deaths. Human retaliation. Then the assembly would point to the conflict and say, see? The death file was true all along. Ward looked at him. This is why the Leviathan flies armed to a rescue. This is why every Terran captain assumes a distress call near the frontier could be a trap. And this is why your people were told not to come near us. Oren could barely pull enough air into his lungs, even in the perfect atmosphere of the ready room. Everything he had believed about the broader was rearranging itself in real time. Peace-loving member states. Restricted Earth. Frontier militarization. Manufactured isolation. Narrative control through fear. The assembly had not simply warned its citizens away from humans. It had hidden a buildup against them. What happens now? Oren asked. Ward turned back to the glowing cluster of red warships moving across the stars. Now, he said, we get ready for the moment they stop pretending this is an exercise. The words hung in Captain Oren Sale's mind long after he left Captain Ward's ready room. We get ready for the moment they stop pretending this is an exercise. There had been no dramatics in the way Ward said it, no attempt to turn fear into theater. That was what made it worse. Humans, Oren was beginning to understand, did not always raise their voices when danger approached. Sometimes they became quieter, more precise, more focused. Like deep water before a storm. As he walked back through the Leviathan's corridors, he saw the change spreading through the ship. It was subtle at first. Bulkhead displays that had previously shown routine deck status now carried rotating tactical advisories. Security doors that had remained open during the rescue recovery cycle were testing their seals. Marines in dark armor moved in pairs instead of alone. Flight crews hurried toward the launch bays with helmets under one arm. Engineers wheeled fresh power cells and shield components toward sections of the ship Oren had not been allowed near. No alarms. No panic. Just preparation. That somehow felt far more serious than fear. When he reached the Cellari habitat deck, he found Dr. Lina standing near the central window basin, reading through a Terran medical brief on her tablet with an expression he could not immediately place. Not anger. Not surprise. Disillusionment. You know, she said without looking up, I asked Dr. Cross whether this kind of military readiness was normal for them. Oren stopped beside her. What did she say? Lina gave a bitter little breath. She asked me whether our people had ever lived next door to civilizations that called us monsters while building war stations near our colonies. Oren had no answer for that. Across the room, the apprentices were gathered around two off-duty Terran crew members who were teaching them some kind of hand game involving quick reflexes, laughter, and constant failure. Little Senna missed a move, burst into bright frustration, and pointed accusingly at the human sailor opposite her. You cheated. The translator rendered it half a second late. The sailor placed one hand over his heart in mock outrage. I would never. Senna narrowed her eyes. That means you did. The others laughed. It was such a small thing, so ordinary, that it nearly hurt to watch. These children had almost died in vacuum. Now they were arguing with deathworlders over a game. Rel entered from the adjoining compartment, his arm fully repaired and held now only by a light stabilizing wrap. He saw Oren and crossed the room quickly. You've heard? He asked. Oren nodded. Rel lowered his voice. The crew is talking. Not ours. Theirs. Quietly, but enough. Haven's Reach is an agricultural colony. Families. Schools. They think the Keth are massing just beyond legal challenge range. They expect an attack. Rel's jaw tightened. They expect to be blamed for surviving one. Oren looked again toward the Terran sailor sitting on the floor with Cellari children. One of them had folded 3 more paper birds and lined them across his knee as if he were presenting military honors. This ship saved us, Oren said quietly. And the assembly would have called them the threat. Rel followed his gaze. Maybe the assembly needs the story more than the truth. That thought struck too close to something Oren was already beginning to fear. He left the habitat deck not long after and made his way through the ship almost without deciding to. Past the medical ward. Past a readiness station where Terran Marines were checking restraint kits and ammunition seals with equal calm. Past a chapel alcove where a single human officer sat alone, eyes closed, perhaps praying, perhaps only breathing through what was coming. By the time Oren realized where he was going, he was standing outside the Leviathan's primary operations theater. Inside, the room was alive with moving light. A three-dimensional battle map filled the center, showing the border region in impossible detail. Human task groups pulsed blue. Civilian traffic lanes glowed white. The advancing Keth formation burned red across the edge of the display like an infection moving through tissue. Ward stood at the center with Commander Shaw, Major Alvarez, Dr. Cross, and half a dozen other senior officers. The fact that the chief medical officer was present at a war briefing told Oren more about human priorities than any speech could have. Ward noticed him first. Captain Sale. Several Terran officers turned. Oren might once have felt intimidated entering a room where armed deathworlders prepared for battle. Instead, what he felt was urgency. "I need to know what you intend to do," he said. Ward studied him for a moment, then gestured him in. "Come look." Oren stepped closer to the map. The tactical display zoomed toward Haven's Reach. Sensor arcs spread from the colony's moons. Defensive platforms glimmered at key orbits. Merchant ships were already being redirected away from the system. Emergency shelters on the surface appeared as a net of highlighted zones. "You're evacuating civilians," Oren said. "We started 6 hours ago," said Commander Shaw. "Priority groups first. Children, medical dependents, low-mobility populations. Cargo lanes are being converted to outbound lifts." "You think the Keth will strike the surface?" Ward's face did not change. "I think any power willing to manufacture a border crisis is willing to let civilians die if it helps shape the narrative afterward." Major Alvarez touched the display and brought up another data layer. Intercepted communication traffic. Not enough for a public release, but enough for pattern analysis. Their formation isn't customs. It's assault spacing. Another officer added, "And they've gone dark in the exact way fleets do when they want deniability until the last possible minute." Oren looked from one human face to another. None of them seemed excited by the prospect of combat. None welcomed it. They spoke of it like surgeons discussing a coming operation that would be painful, messy, and necessary. "What if you retreat?" Oren asked. Shaw answered first. "Then they occupy Haven's Reach and call it a defensive seizure." "What if you negotiate?" "We have," Ward said. "For 23 years. And if you fight," Oren said softly, "the assembly will say the deathworlders revealed their true nature." No one in the room argued with him, and somehow that silence was worse than disagreement. At last Ward folded his arms behind his back. "Captain, I'll speak plainly. If the Keth cross into attack range, we will defend our civilians. Fully. That response will be used against us by every power that already wants humanity isolated. They'll say our readiness proves aggression. They'll say our survival instincts are barbaric. And somewhere in all of that noise, the simple fact will be buried. That they came to your homes," Oren said. "Yes." The room went quiet. Oren stared at the red markers moving toward Haven's Reach, and with each passing second he felt another layer of his old certainty peel away. He had spent his life believing civilization meant distance from violence. But perhaps, in some parts of the galaxy, civilization meant being willing to stand between violence and the defenseless. "I was supposed to return to the assembly at the nearest outpost," he said at last. Ward nodded once. "That was the standing plan. I'm changing it." That got everyone's full attention. Major Alvarez looked at him carefully. "Captain, if this becomes a shooting war, Haven's Reach will not be a safe place for civilians, and your people are still recovering." "My people were dying," Oren said. "Your people crossed hostile space to save them. I have seen your medics work. I have seen your sailors care for our children. I have seen your ship prepare for war not because it seeks it, but because others bring it to your door and expect you to apologize for resisting. If I go back now with only words, the assembly will dismiss me." Ward's eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility, but in concentration. "What are you asking?" I want to witness what happens next, Oren said. Not as your prisoner. Not as your hostage. As an observer. If the Keth provoke this conflict, if they force your hand, then I will carry the truth myself. And not just as rescued testimony. As a direct witness. Lina's voice came from the doorway behind him. And he won't be the only one. Oren turned. Dr. Lina stood there with Rel and Turin beside her. None of them looked fully recovered. All of them looked fully decided. Rel lifted his chin. If the assembly is going to lie, it should have to lie to our faces. Turin added, I spent my life believing humans were too dangerous to contact. I'd like to see whether the real danger is who our records told us to fear. For the first time since entering the operations theater, a visible emotion crossed Captain Ward's face. Respect. He looked at each of them in turn, then toward Commander Shaw, then back to the map where the Red Fleet kept moving. Finally he said, very well. He touched the command rail. The tactical display widened, and the blue line representing the Leviathan shifted course. Helm, Ward said into the shipwide command channel, his voice steady as iron, alter vector for Haven's Reach. Bring the task group to readiness condition 2. Maintain evacuation support, defensive posture only unless fired upon. And somebody inform Admiral Vance that our guests have decided to witness history. Beyond the hull, the stars remained cold and distant. But aboard the Leviathan, the final stretch of waiting had ended. The next time Oren Sale looked into human eyes during a crisis, it would not be in a medical bay or a rescue corridor. It would be on the edge of war. The closer the Leviathan came to Haven's Reach, the more the warship changed around Captain Oren Sale. It was not just the hum of the engines or the sharper rhythm in the corridors. It was the way every human on board seemed to settle into a harder version of themselves, not colder, not crueler, but more exact. Conversations became shorter. Movements became cleaner. Every order carried farther. The easy warmth that had filled the medical decks and habitat corridors did not disappear, but it moved beneath something heavier now, like a fire banked under steel. Through the main observation blister near the forward command ring, Oren got his first distant look at the colony system. Haven's Reach was beautiful. A pale gold star lit a spread of worlds and stations suspended in quiet precision. The inhabited planet itself turned slowly below, wide blue oceans broken by green continents and long white storm bands curling over the northern hemisphere. Orbital platforms circled in layered rings above it, some civilian, some clearly defensive. Freighters were pulling away from the inner lanes in disciplined streams, escorted by smaller Terran ships with flashing guidance lights. Shuttles moved constantly between surface launch towers and emergency transport stations, carrying people up and away as fast as the system could manage. To Oren, who had expected panic, the order of it was almost shocking. They're evacuating a whole world, Turin whispered beside him. Not the whole world, said Commander Shaw, who had stepped up behind them without either Selari noticing. Not enough lift for that in this time window. We're prioritizing the vulnerable zones and anyone in orbital exposure bands. Surface shelters handle the rest if we do our job. If we do our job. The phrase was simple. It carried the weight of millions. Below them, Haven's Reach glittered in sunlight. Above it, the first lines of Terran defense were already forming. The Leviathan slid into position with 2 cruisers off its flanks and a screen of smaller destroyers extending ahead like a shield made of moving steel. Farther out, drones deployed in bright points across the dark, building a sensor web thick enough to catch the first violent intention before it became action. Oren watched as a convoy of civilian transports broke from high anchor and began accelerating away from the planet in carefully staggered lines. They could run, he said quietly. Shaw folded her arms behind her back. Some already have. But not everyone can. Not in time. And your fleet stays. This time, when she answered, there was no edge in her voice at all. That's what fleets are for. The operations theater became Oren's second world over the next several hours. The Cellari observers had been given a raised station overlooking the main tactical floor, not hidden away, not kept from the truth. Ward had made good on his promise. If Oren wished to witness, then he would witness everything. The human captain did not soften what was happening, nor dress it in speeches. He simply let the stars speak for themselves. The red Keth formation kept growing. Long-range recon updated every 40 minutes, then every 20, then almost continuously as new signatures resolved. What had first looked like a concentrated strike group now revealed itself as something more deliberate and more dangerous. Assault carriers. Missile barges. Electronic warfare frigates. Logistics tenders positioned just far enough back to preserve deniability. They were not traveling like customs inspectors or anti-piracy patrols. They were traveling like a fleet that expected to fight and survive. Ward stood at the center rail of the command deck, one hand resting on the tactical console as status reports rolled in around him. Evacuation update. 72% complete in orbital rings 1 through 3. Surface shelter transfer at 41% and climbing. Colony governor confirms agricultural dome sectors locked down. Emergency reserves distributed. Defense grid. Planetary batteries online. Station shields at full output. Missile stocks distributed to outer platforms. Any hails from the Keth? Commander Shaw answered. 3. All identical. They claim temporary maneuver rights for a sovereignty verification operation and accuse us of unlawful military concentration. A short, humorless sound passed through one of the bridge officers. Ward didn't smile. Respond as before, he said. Terran civilians are evacuating under lawful defensive protocol. Any incursion beyond the declared exclusion line will be treated as hostile approach. Keep the language clean. Oren leaned toward Rel, who stood beside him, eyes fixed on the display. They still haven't fired. Rel nodded slowly. Because they want the humans to fire first. Below them, a young human signals officer was repeating the latest response to the Keth in a voice so controlled it might have been used for weather updates. No threats. No chest beating. No rage. Just a line. Cross it, and we will defend our people. That was when Oren began to understand what frightened the assembly about humanity. It was not simply that humans could build warships. Many species could. It was not simply that they could fight. The frontier was full of fighters. What made humanity dangerous in the eyes of those who wished to control the story was something else. Humans did not need hatred to resist. They only needed a reason. Hours passed. The gap closed. On Haven's Reach, night rolled over one hemisphere of the planet, and the cities below dimmed into shielded grids. In orbit, the evacuation convoys kept moving. Families packed into transports. Cargo hulls stripped and repurposed to carry civilians. Emergency channels flooded with instructions, reassurances, route assignments, prayer messages, children asking when it would be over. Dr. Cross joined Oren at the observer rail for a brief moment between emergency triage rotations. She looked more tired than he had yet seen her, but there was no hesitation in her. Your crew? He asked. Stable, she said. The youngest are sleeping. That counts as a miracle around here. Oren glanced toward the tactical display. And this? Her eyes followed his. This is the part where everyone hopes they prepared enough. You speak as if battle is already decided. Cross shook her head. No. Battle's never decided until somebody makes the choice that can't be taken back. But medicine teaches you something useful. If you wait too long to recognize what's happening in front of you, people die because you preferred denial over action. Before Oren could answer, a sharp tone cut across the command deck. New contact burst from the Keth formation. Every face turned to the center displays. A transmission opened on the main screen. The image that appeared was of a Keth commander seated in a dark command chamber lined with polished metal and banner sigils. He was broad-faced, scaled across the jaw ridges, his expression arranged into something almost polite. "This is Fleet Prefect Jarek of the Keth Dominion," the translator rendered. "Terran forces are ordered to withdraw from disputed approach lanes. Your unauthorized fortification of this sector constitutes destabilizing aggression. Stand down immediately and permit lawful Dominion inspection of Haven's Reach orbital traffic." Orin felt a chill move through him. Haven's Reach was not disputed space. Even he knew that now. Ward stepped forward into view of the return camera. His expression did not change. "This is Captain Elias Ward of the United Terran warship Leviathan. Haven's Reach is sovereign Terran territory. Civilian evacuation is underway. You will halt your advance and alter course away from this system." Jarek's gaze narrowed. "Your species continues to interpret routine border administration as provocation. This is precisely the instability our concerns anticipated." The words were chosen carefully. Meant to be heard later. Meant to survive in the records. Ward answered just as carefully. "You are approaching a civilian world with assault spacing and electronic masking. Turn back now." For a heartbeat, Jarek did not speak. Then the Keth commander gave the faintest smile, one without warmth in it at all. "Your people always do make everything sound so dramatic." The transmission ended. Silence fell across the Leviathan's command deck, broken only by the low pulse of systems and the steady flow of incoming data. Then Commander Shaw's console flared red. "Captain, multiple Keth ships are changing vector." "How many?" 12 confirmed. "Fast attack profile. They're splitting wide around the exclusion line. Toward us." Shaw's eyes scanned the new trajectories. Then her expression hardened. "No," she said. "Toward the civilian convoy." The words hit the room like a physical blow. On the main tactical display, a cluster of white transport icons, slow, overloaded, full of evacuees, suddenly sat directly in the path of the incoming red interceptors. Ward was already moving. Signal Convoy Group Aurelia. Immediate scatter protocol. Destroyer screen, burn hard and intercept. Weapons hold unless they fire first. A younger officer looked up, disbelief plain on his face. "Sir, if we wait." "I know exactly what happens if we wait," Ward said, voice cutting like a blade. "Do it." Alarms rose across the bridge. Outside the forward glass, the Leviathan's escorts peeled away in bursts of blue-white flame, racing toward the vulnerable transport line. On the tactical map, the distance between red and white markers began collapsing by the second. Orin gripped the observer rail until his hands ached. The Keth had found their opening. Not a military target. Not a warship. A convoy full of fleeing civilians. And in the terrible, breathless seconds before the first shot, Captain Orin Sale realized he was about to witness the exact moment a lie became war. The first shot did not look dramatic on the tactical display. It appeared as a single pulse of light moving from red toward white, one narrow line crossing a screen full of icons and vectors. But Captain Orin Sale would remember it for the rest of his life, because he knew exactly what it meant. The Keth had chosen their target, and it was not the Terran fleet standing ready between them and the colony. It was a civilian transport heavy with evacuees, engines overloaded, shields barely adequate, trying to carry families away from a war they had not started. "Impact in 7 seconds, the tactical officer called. The entire bridge of the Leviathan seemed to inhale at once. "Convoy Aurelia, evasive break now," Commander Shaw snapped into the comm grid. "Hard port. Dump decoys. Move, move, move." On the main display, the lead transport lurched sideways in a desperate maneuver too slow for comfort. The Keth pulse clipped its aft shield and burst into a spreading halo of white static. The transport spun, venting atmosphere and debris. A second later, the Keth formation opened fire in full. No warning. No declaration. No accident. Missiles streamed from 2 red-marked escorts. Rail strikes followed from a third. Jamming washed across the civilian channel, drowning evacuation traffic in shrieks of electronic noise. White icons scattered as the convoy broke formation in panic. And only then did Captain Elias Ward give the order he had been holding back with visible force. Weapons free. Defend the convoy. The Leviathan came alive. From Oren's observer station, the shift was instant and terrifying. One heartbeat the human warship had been a shield held still by discipline. The next it became something vast and precise and deadly, every system locking into purpose. The floor beneath his feet thrummed as main batteries charged. New icons erupted from the Leviathan's flanks as interceptor drones launched in dense clouds. Along the outer hull, point defense emplacements began firing so rapidly that the void itself seemed to strobe. Destroyer screen, intercept Keth fast movers. Cruiser line, brace for missile bloom. Convoy Aurelia, maintain scatter. Hold together if you can, but move. The first exchange unfolded in impossible speed. Human interceptors streaked across the dark and met the incoming missiles in chains of violent sparks. One Keth attack craft vanished under a lattice of defensive fire before it could complete its firing pass. A second slipped through, only to be rammed broadside by a Terran destroyer that placed its own hull directly between the raider and a transport carrying over 3,000 civilians. The destroyer's shields flared white, overloaded, and failed. It did not move away. It kept its position. "Sir," said a voice from lower tactical, tight with strain, "TNS Merrick has lost outer shielding. They're still screening the convoy." Ward did not look away from the display. "Signal them I see it." Another transport died. This time Oren saw it through the forward observation blister instead of the tactical map. Far off against the black, one of the white convoy lights blossomed into a terrible silent flower of fire. For an instant it held its shape, bright and almost beautiful. Then the middle caved inward, and fragments spun away into darkness. Rel made a sound beside him that was half breath, half grief. "They fired on evacuees," Turin whispered, as if saying it aloud might still make it impossible. "They wanted us to witness," Dr. Lina said from behind them. On the command deck below, nobody wasted time on outrage. There would be time for that later, if they survived. The humans answered in the language they knew best under pressure: action. Target Keth launcher frigates Alpha and Gamma. Solution locked. Fire. The Leviathan's main guns discharged. Oren had no comparison for it in Cellari experience. The human dreadnought did not spit visible beams or dramatic arcs. It struck with brutal efficiency. 2 bright lances cut across the void, crossing millions of meters in an instant. The first Keth launcher frigate lost its bow completely. The second took the hit across its midline and broke apart in 3 burning sections, each half still moving from momentum as atmosphere and metal vented into space. No cheer rose from the Terran bridge. No triumph. Just the next report. "Keth line adjusting. They're rotating heavy ships toward us." "About time," said Major Alvarez quietly. The battle widened. A cloud of small Keth attack craft swept out from behind their forward escorts, trying to knife through the destroyer screen and hit the convoy from multiple angles. Terran drones met them head-on. Some collided in showers of fragmented light. Others detonated against countermeasures. A handful broke through, only to run into layered point defense webs from the cruisers guarding the transport lanes. Still, enough got through to hurt. One civilian freighter took a kinetic strike through its engine spine and spun out of control, venting thousands of emergency cryopods into space. Another lost thrust and began drifting toward the gravity well of Haven's Reach. A Terran rescue cutter broke formation under fire to chase it, latched on, and started hauling it clear while tracer fire burst around both ships. Orin stared at the tactical board, unable to look away. The humans were not fighting the way the assembly would describe it later. They were not charging for conquest. They were not striking first out of hunger or bloodlust. Every movement on that board bent around one principle and one principle only. Protect the civilians. Even their aggression was defensive in shape. Commander Shaw's station flashed again. Captain, new Keth transmission burst. Patch it through. The bridge speakers filled with Fleet Prefect Jarek's voice, smooth and composed even as his ships tried to slaughter refugees. Terran forces have initiated unlawful military escalation in a disputed corridor. Dominion vessels are responding to aggressive interference against a lawful inspection action. For a moment, the sheer audacity of it stole Orin's breath. They're recording their lie in real time, he said. Ward didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the convoy data. At last he said, yes. The word carried no surprise. Only anger kept under rigid control. Then Haven's Reach itself entered the fight. A shrill tone sounded from tactical. Planetary defense requesting fire clearance. Ward answered at once. Granted. From the nightside edge of the colony world, hidden batteries came alive. Bright spears rose from the darkness below and punched upward through orbital space, forcing the outer Keth line to break formation. One enemy cruiser took a direct surface-to-orbit strike and vanished in a bloom of expanding plasma. Another veered away trailing burning debris. The Terran fleet pressed the opening. Cruisers advanced by measured increments, never outrunning their shield overlap, never leaving the convoy uncovered. Destroyers rotated damaged hulls behind fresh ones. Rescue tugs threaded impossible paths through debris fields to recover survivors from shattered transports. Through it all, the Leviathan stood at the center like the anchor of a storm, guns flashing, interceptors launching, command channels holding the entire defense together by will. Multiple boarders inbound to Station Ring 3, a sensor officer called. Major Alvarez was already moving toward the lift. Marine teams on me. Ward gave a single nod. Keep them off the stations. She was gone in seconds. On another deck, Dr. Cross had transformed the med bay from recovery ward to wartime triage center. Orin knew because one of the live side feeds shifted briefly, showing Terran medics wheeling in burnt civilians from damaged shuttles while Cellari crew members, still weak from their own rescue, helped where they could. Lina saw it too. Our people are assisting, she asked. A junior bridge officer glanced up. Dr. Cross said if they were willing, she'd take every hand she could get. Rel straightened. Then we should be there. Orin turned to him sharply, but Rel's expression did not waver. He's right, Turin said, pale but steady. We came to witness. That includes what your war looks like when civilians bleed. Before Orin could answer, the tactical display pulsed red again. Leviathan taking targeting lock from Keth heavy battery. Counterjam engaged. Too late. Brace. The hit slammed through the human warship with a force Orin felt in his bones. The deck lurched hard enough to throw several officers against their consoles. Lights dimmed. Somewhere aft, metal screamed. The forward display rippled with static before stabilizing. Damage report. Port shielding down 22%. Compartment fires on decks 9 through 11. Fold relay knocked offline. Medical reports casualties in the secondary hangar. Ward steadied himself on the command rail and spoke as if the ship had merely hit rough weather. Return fire. The Leviathan answered with everything. Its main spinal battery lit the darkness in a single blinding line, a concentrated strike so intense that even the polarized bridge glass darkened to compensate. The beam crossed the void and hit the Keth heavy cruiser amidships. For a fraction of a second the enemy vessel held together. Then it split open from within, reactor light spilling through its broken frame like a star being born the wrong way. A murmur passed across the bridge. Not celebration. Relief. The pressure on the convoy began to break. One by one, the surviving Keth ships started to peel away from the civilian lane, some burning, some crippled, some still dangerous but no longer coordinated. Terran destroyers pursued only far enough to force the withdrawal. They did not overextend. They did not chase vengeance into the dark. Enemy formation losing cohesion, Shaw reported. Retreat vectors confirmed on 17 major hulls. Convoy status. A pause. Then, 31 transports intact. 4 severely damaged. 3 destroyed. Rescue operations ongoing. Surface casualties unknown. Too many, Oren thought. Far too many. But Haven's Reach still lived. The main screen flickered once more, and Jarek's image returned. This time the Keth commander's composure had cracked at the edges. "This aggression will be reported to the Assembly in full," he said. "Your species has proven exactly what was feared." Oren stepped forward before he even knew he was moving. "Liar," he said. The entire bridge went still. Jarek's eyes shifted, noticing him for the first time. A Cellari captain standing on a human warship amid battle damage and rescue traffic. Oren felt every lesson of his old life burning away inside him. "I watched your ships fire on fleeing civilians," he said, voice carrying across the command deck. "I watched humans hold fire until you struck first. I watched them shield transports with their own hulls. I watched your lie become murder." Jarek's expression hardened into something ugly. The transmission cut without reply. Silence followed. Then, softly, Ward said, "Get that recording backed up in 12 places." Outside the Leviathan, the battlefield glowed with drifting wreckage, rescue beacons, and the wounded light of ships that had survived by inches. Humanity had not sought the war handed to it at Haven's Reach. But now the lie had witnesses. And this time, one of them belonged to the Assembly itself. When the firing finally stopped, the silence felt almost violent. Not true silence, of course. The Leviathan still groaned with heat stress through its armored spine. Damage alarms still pulsed in sealed compartments. Rescue channels still overlapped in urgent bursts as Terran cutters hunted for survivors among drifting wreckage. But compared to the chaos of battle, the sudden absence of weapons fire felt unnatural, like the galaxy itself had paused to stare at what the Keth Dominion had done. Captain Oren Sale stood at the bridge rail and looked out through the forward glass at the shattered corridor above Haven's Reach. Civilian transports drifted under escort, some blackened, some venting atmosphere, some held together only by emergency fields and human determination. Wreckage spun slowly between them. Here and there, emergency beacons flashed like tiny artificial stars, each one marking escape pods, debris clusters, or the last known position of a ship that had broken apart too quickly to save everyone aboard. The cost of the lie was everywhere. Commander Shaw was the first to break the stillness. "Primary threat group is in retreat. Outer pursuit line is holding at the exclusion boundary. Rescue operations remain priority 1. Captain Ward nodded once. "No deep chase." One of the younger bridge officers looked up in surprise. "Sir, we could cripple half their surviving line before they regroup." "We could," Ward said. "And then they'd say this was about conquest instead of defense. Hold the line. Save who we can." That was the moment Oren understood something the Assembly had never taught him. Restraint was not weakness. Sometimes restraint was the only thing keeping truth alive long enough to be seen. He turned from the tactical display and hurried with Rel, Turin, and Dr. Lina toward the medical decks. No one stopped them. No one treated them as guests too delicate to witness the aftermath. The Terrans had let them see the battle, and now they let them see the price. The med bays were overflowing. Rows of stretchers extended into the surrounding corridors. Human civilians from Haven's Reach lay beside wounded sailors, marines, and station personnel. Some were burned. Some were bleeding. Some sat in stunned silence holding emergency blankets around children too shocked to cry. Terran medics moved through it all with relentless precision, triaging, stabilizing, operating where they stood if they had to. The blue-lit calm of the Cellari rescue days was gone. In its place was something harsher and far more revealing. This was what human compassion looked like under pressure. Dr. Cross spotted Lina immediately. Good. I need every alien-safe hand I can get. Decompression cases in Corridor C, smoke inhalation in Bay 4, and if any of your people can help with hydration support, send them now. Lina didn't hesitate. We're with you. Rel disappeared toward a supply line where frightened children were being sorted and tagged for transport planetside. Turin joined a communications station and started helping route translated family identification requests. Oren found himself kneeling beside a wounded colony woman whose left arm had been wrapped in a fast-clot bandage while her little son kept asking where his father was. The translator struggled with her words, but not with her expression. Fear looked the same in every language. Hours passed in a blur of blood, smoke, antiseptic, and exhausted courage. Oren saw Terran Marines carrying civilians as gently as parents. He saw engineers with grease still on their sleeves helping sort the dead because there was nobody else free to do it. He saw Dr. Cross pause for no more than 6 seconds after losing a patient, close the woman's eyes with one gloved hand, and move to the next stretcher because 3 more were waiting. No one aboard the Leviathan celebrated victory. They were too busy saving what the Keth had tried to destroy. By the next cycle, Haven's Reach still stood. The evacuation had not been clean. The casualty count was rising. 3 transports had been lost with all hands, and dozens more carried wounded by the hundreds. A Terran destroyer that had shielded the convoy, the Merrick, was dead in space but recoverable. 2 station rings had suffered boarding attempts before Major Alvarez's Marines drove the attackers back. The colony governor had issued a statement calling the fleet defense, the only reason our children are still alive. And across interstellar channels, the Keth Dominion was already broadcasting a different story. Aggressive deathworlders attack lawful inspectors. Terran militarists escalate disputed border maneuver. Civilian losses result from human provocation. When Oren heard the first replay, he felt physically ill. They're moving fast, Shaw said from the Leviathan strategy room, where fresh diplomatic feeds now floated beside battle damage reports. Not just the Keth. Several assembly blocks are amplifying the same wording. Ward stood with both hands braced against the tactical table. Because the narrative was prepared before the shooting started. A secure channel opened over the room. Rear Admiral Naomi Vance appeared above the display, her face harder than Oren had yet seen it. Haven's Reach is secured for now, she said. Reinforcements are taking over defense posture. Which means we move to the next battlefield. The assembly, Oren said. Vance looked directly at him. Yes, Captain Sale. Emergency hearing has been called at Harmony Spire. The Keth want formal condemnation before raw data spreads too far. Lina straightened beside him. Then we go there now. Vance's eyes shifted to Ward. Can the Leviathan make the run? Scarred, but yes, Ward said. We hand local command to Task Force Bastion and depart within 6 hours. Oren heard himself speak before doubt could catch him. I want every rescue log. Every battlefield recording. Every medbay transcript from the day you saved us. If they accuse humanity of being monsters, then the assembly can watch monsters rebuild alien lungs, carry refugee children, and place their own ships in the line of fire. For the first time since the battle, Admiral Vance smiled, though there was no joy in it. Only approval. That, she said, is exactly what I hoped you'd say. The Leviathan left Haven's reach with hull scars still glowing under repair seals and half its decks running on overworked emergency teams. It was not the image of clean military perfection the assembly expected from a threatening species. It looked battered. Tired. Wounded from choosing to stand in front of others. To Oren, that made it far more convincing. During the transit to Harmony Spire, the Cellari apprentices remained close to the human crew who had helped them recover. Little Senna, who had once asked if they were going to die, now sat in a briefing room with a paper bird in her lap while Oren prepared his statement. She watched him in unusual silence until finally she asked, "Will they believe you?" Oren looked down at her small face and wished he could answer with certainty. "I don't know," he admitted. She held up the bird. "Then tell them this was from a human sailor. Monsters don't make these." It was such a child's answer that it nearly broke him. When Harmony Spire finally appeared beyond the viewport, even the humans went quiet. The great assembly station hung above a white-blue gas giant like a silver crown, elegant and enormous, all curves and mirrored light. Oren had dreamed of standing there when he was young. It represented refinement, diplomacy, civilized order. Everything the assembly claimed to be. And as the Leviathan approached, visibly armed and visibly damaged, civilian traffic around the station pulled back in nervous arcs. The Deathworld ship had arrived at the heart of polite space. They were met not by welcome but by procedure. Assembly traffic control demanded weapon safing confirmation 3 separate times. Docking authority attempted to redirect the Leviathan to an outer military spindle far from the main diplomatic ring. Only when Oren himself transmitted his identity and declared emergency witness status did the station authorities relent. Even then, the reception chamber was cold. Delegates gathered in rising tiers beneath a dome of projected stars. Species from across assembly space watched from private boxes, public galleries, and remote feeds. At the center, elevated above them all, sat the arbitration circle, those same calm-faced officials who had allowed Earth to remain a rumor wrapped in warning labels for over 2 decades. One of the senior adjudicators, a pale Hetheri with gold circuit markings around her eyes, opened the proceedings. This emergency session has been called to address unlawful Terran escalation in a disputed frontier sector. No, Oren said. His voice cut across the chamber before she could continue. Every face turned. He stepped into the center ring alone at first, though he knew Ward, Lina, Rel, Turin, and an armed but respectfully distant Terran escort stood just beyond the threshold. He did not need them yet. The truth, for the moment, was enough. No, Oren repeated, louder now. This hearing will address an attempted massacre of civilians by the Keth Dominion and the deliberate falsification of humanity's nature by those who found lies more useful than contact. A wave of shocked sound rippled through the chamber. The adjudicator's expression tightened. Captain Sale, you are a rescued party under extraordinary emotional strain. The assembly will hear your statement in order, but inflammatory. You restricted Earth, Oren said, stepping forward. You taught us they were unstable predators. You hid their petitions. You hid the border buildup. You hid the war stations. And while you called them dangerous, they crossed hostile space to save my crew when every civilized world was too far away to try. He turned toward the public tiers. My ship was dying. Our children were suffocating. Humans answered. With a signal from Turin at the evidence station, the chamber lights dimmed and the recordings began. First, the whisper of dawn drifting broken and leaking atmosphere. Then the Leviathan emerging from fold, vast and terrifying, exactly the image the assembly would expect from a Deathworld warship. Then the boarding footage. Major Alvarez removing her helmet. Terran medics adjusting alien air mixtures before even being asked. Dr. Cross saving Cellari apprentices who had never met a human in their lives. Human crew converting a warship habitat deck into shelter for frightened strangers. The chamber remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of control. It was the silence of people watching their assumptions crack. Then came Haven's reach. The Keth transmission. The red vectors turning toward the civilian convoy. The first shot striking a transport. The Merrick placing itself in the line of fire. Terran destroyers screening refugees instead of pursuing glory. Planetary defense firing only after civilians were under attack. Jarek's lie transmitted while his ships murdered evacuees. And finally, Orin's own voice from the Leviathan bridge, calling him what he was. Liar. When the lights rose again, the chamber was no longer calm. Delegates were shouting. Some demanded verification. Others demanded to know why assembly contact petitions from Earth had been sealed. A Keth representative tried to stand and protest manipulated evidence, only for Dr. Lina to step into the center ring beside Orin and say, with icy precision, "I helped treat the wounded after that battle. If you call this false, then you call my own hands false with it." Rel joined them. Then Turin. Then, to the astonishment of the chamber, little Senna walked in carrying her paper bird. She looked up at tiers full of officials who had spent years debating species they had never bothered to know. "They saved us," she said simply. "Why were you afraid of them instead of the ones who shot at families?" No adult speech in the chamber struck harder than that. The session dissolved after that. Not into resolution, not yet. Systems like the assembly did not change in a single hour. But they did fracture. Emergency inquiries were launched. Keth channels were suspended pending investigation. Sealed contact records regarding Earth were ordered opened under public pressure. Across 100-member worlds, ordinary citizens watched the feeds and began asking dangerous questions of their own. An outside Harmony spire, anchored in full view of polite civilization, the Leviathan waited. Scarred. Armed. Patient. No longer hidden behind warning labels. Later, as Orin stood at a viewport overlooking the vast curve of the station and the warship beyond it, Captain Ward joined him in silence. "They'll fight this," Orin said. Ward nodded. "Truth usually has to." Orin looked at the Leviathan, remembering the fear he had felt when it first emerged from fold space, black and immense and bristling with power. He understood now why the sight had frightened him so deeply. Not because it had looked like death. Because it had looked like a judgment on everyone who had lied about what strength was for. "When I sent that distress call," Orin said quietly, "I thought I was choosing between death and monsters." Ward glanced at him. "And what did you choose?" Orin watched Terran repair crews moving across the wounded hull, preparing the ship for whatever came next. "I chose the only people in the galaxy who heard strangers begging for help," he said, "and came anyway." Out across assembly space, the story would spread in 1,000 versions. Some would still call humans dangerous. Some would call them necessary. Some, at last, would call them what they had proven themselves to be. But the oldest lie was broken forever. Because when the SOS went out into the dark, it did not summon monsters. It summoned protectors.